I heard that al-Masri likens radical Islam to cancer. I can dig it, and I appreciate him speaking out against the actions of these murderers. That's a heavy statement, since he was in the Muslim Brotherhood. He also says if you have cancer, it won't help you if I tell you that you have the flu. I must tell you clearly that you have cancer. Everything comes from Allah, but this should not prevent us from studying the underlying reasons of this cancer among us. I agree. Let's study this underlying reason.
I think what happened. Propaganda.
It's hard to make an observation on this without sounding contentious. It's not my intention, but if we want to get down to the core of this cancer, you'd have to get down to what they're studying, and it's the caustic writings of the Quran. These aren't radicals. These are true believers. Those who speak as al-Masri is speaking are the radicals, because they are setting themselves apart from what the Quran teaches if they're advocating a more moderate approach. On a side note, I want to remind y'all of how the terms liberal and conservative get mixed up. If you're conservative with Islam, you stick to what its doctrine says, and you'll murder people because they are guilty of not submitting to Allah. If you're liberal or moderate with that doctrine, you'll try to say that's not what that really means. However, being conservative or liberal have different results with Christianity. Because if you're conservative with Christianity, you stick to what the doctrine says, and you'll love your neighbor as well as your enemies. If you're liberal with Christianity, you'll try to shape Jesus into some socialist who believes in violating the commandment to not steal by submitting to the state's desire to deprive you of what you worked for under the guise of the fair treatment of others, which ultimately leads to murder, because governments end up waging genocide to have this perfect, classless, fair society. Jesus doesn't call for us to do this. Now, as I've mentioned to y'all before, the Quran is a satanic manifesto. If we want to get down to the core of the cancer, let's call it like it is. I agree. Let's not call it the flu. You can tell this by the creation of man. The Bible makes it very clear that human life is absolutely precious because we are made in the image of God. In the Quran, mankind is not made in the image of God. So our value is based on what? This is why Jesus tells us to love God and love your neighbor as yourself, because loving God is the vehicle to knowing how to properly love your neighbor as you would love yourself. See, Iblis, or Satan, hates the idea that man was created in God's image. And not only is the Quran a satanic manifesto, it is the book of the devil incriminating himself. In the Quran, Iblis refuses to bow to Adam. Why would Iblis bow to Adam? It wasn't just because he thought he was better than Adam, but because he knew Adam was created in the image of God. And Satan didn't see God himself as someone to bow down to either. In fact, his objective is to ascend above God. I reckon in the Quran you have a trinity: Allah, Iblis, and Muhammad. Just like in the Bible, you have a trinity: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the Bible, Jesus is sacrificed in delivering salvation to us. In the Quran, Iblis is sacrificed in the impedance of our salvation. Jesus and Iblis have a mission and are willing to die in this objective and are commissioned to their objectives. Jesus is sent into battle by God to throw himself over a grenade so that the rest of us can be saved. Iblis is sent by Allah with dynamite strapped to him to destroy others around him. He is the original suicide bomber, and he will be sacrificed because even in the Quran, Iblis is thrown into the lake of fire, which I find weird because in the Quran, the lake of fire really wouldn't be punishment for Iblis. It would be a reward. Iblis tells you himself that he is made of fire. So why would throwing him in a lake of fire be punishment? He'll just be retiring in a hot tub. Did I mention that according to the Quran, Iblis is born of fire? So much for my sacrifice theory. But I digress. Iblis is going to bite the bullet and get framed for what the devil's other persona, Allah, told him to do. And what Allah tells its believers to do is to submit to him and force others to. Moderate Muslims insist that we can live together in peace, which is cool if you believe that living in peace means being submitted to what they believe. You can believe in Jesus as long as that's how we tell you can believe in Jesus. Remember, y'all, the devil masquerades as an angel of light. And wasn't it an angel, supposedly Gabriel, that gave this revelation to Muhammad? The objective of the Quran is to rob you of your salvation. Like the devil, it mimics the truth, just enough to give it credibility so it can effectively deceive. Like I told you, the Quran will tell you that Jesus was born of a virgin and performed miracles and whatnot to give itself credibility in concordance with the Bible, and will tell you that Jesus didn't die on the cross. So if Jesus didn't die before witnesses out in public, then he couldn't prove that only he could conquer death with the power of God by returning. The Quran's objective is to dispel the idea that death, the greatest enemy of us all, can be conquered. See, in the Bible, Jesus conquers death. I can't find in the Quran where death is conquered. Someone may have to point it out to me. I fully admit that I may have missed it. All I can find are descriptions of a paradisical afterlife. That doesn't mean that our greatest enemy is conquered. If in Islam you are rewarded with paradise for your obedience after you die, that doesn't mean you can't still die, because death isn't dealt with. Being immortal in paradise only goes so far if death isn't dealt with. Death entered the world through paradise, where the immortal lived. So in Islamic paradise, even in the afterlife, if death isn't dealt with, death can still claim you. Your immortality is not assured. Remember, Adam and Eve were immortal in paradise. Even the Quran tells you, wheresoever you may be, death will overtake you, even if you are in fortresses built up strong and high. Surah 478. Again, I appreciate that Tariq wants to get to the core of this cancer, and I offer to him that the core of that cancer is the Quran. And that cancer has to be stopped before it spreads in America. Sharia will dominate in America because of political correctness and because of the naivete of people who act like they know so much but don't know that they're deceived. Like people who never even read the Bible and will swear up and down that the Bible never makes the claim that Jesus is God, or that he says he is the Son of God, or that he says he is God incarnate, which is a lie. Even the demons in the Bible recognize Jesus as the Son of God, Matthew 8:29. Who else would the demons fear enough to beg for the mercy of being allowed to dwell even within pigs? So while you secular know-it-alls wrongfully say the Bible makes no such claim about the Jesus, you don't even know that you got that notion from the Quran. You don't even know that the deception of Islam has already gotten into your head. I used to believe it too before I became a Christian. The deception of the Quran added to your desire to reject the fulfillment of the law, Jesus. You think that Islam can't get to you and deceive you into accepting their law, that is Sharia? Another reason why Islam will dominate is because Christians won't be here to stop them. Those of you who don't dig Christians and want a world without God, you'll get what you want. The Bible does point out on a few occasions that God will give people over to their desires, and it ain't pretty. And when it gets really ugly, you're gonna ask, what kind of God would do this? The God who gave you what you wanted, a world without him. But don't say he didn't warn you. Well, the world's already messed up. Yeah, because people keep trying to live without him. I know the concept of a bunch of Christians disappearing before this crap really hits the fan sounds ridiculous. It probably sounded ridiculous to those who saw Noah building the ark too. God's not gonna send you a personal email. He already gave you a letter, and you chose not to believe it. You'll use any excuse not to believe it. Well, the Bible's been translated so many times, it's not credible. Well, there's an easy solution to that. Learn how to speak Greek and Hebrew. Many of you liberal secularists think that knowing how to speak multiple languages makes you a better person anyway. Learn how to speak Hebrew and Greek, and that way you don't have to worry about mistranslations. God's not gonna send ships. There's not gonna be some big procession. There will be a flash of the dead and a flash of the living. And when the fires are finally under control and the smoke has cleared a little, you will be left to Sharia and the New World Order. I know, it's hard to believe, and liberals say we Christians are closed-minded. I'm Alfonso Rachel with ZoNation, and I agree with Tariq. I reckon we need to dig into some spiritual oncology. He'll just be retiring in a hot tub.